Welcome to The Explainer. We're here to take the biggest stories of the day and connect the dots for you, giving you a much clearer picture of what's happening around the world. So today, we are diving deep into the global headlines for July 31st, 2025, using source material from OneRead.news. Our mission is to cut through all the noise and show you the hidden threads that link these major world events together. All right, let's see what the world looks like today.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to weave today's headlines into a single, cohesive story told through four big themes. First, we'll look at the world's major flashpoints and the high-stakes diplomacy surrounding them. Then, we'll pivot to the economic crosswinds that are shaking up markets and creating new tensions. After that, we're focusing on our planet under stress, the extreme weather and natural forces we're all grappling with. And we'll wrap it all up by looking at policy, progress, and people. Basically, how different societies are trying to adapt to all these challenges. Okay, let's dive right in. All right, first up, global flashpoints. What we're seeing today is a world stage where the pressure is seriously being dialed up. We're talking about high-stakes diplomatic maneuvering, brand new legal challenges, and, the very real, very staggering human cost of conflict. This is a story about how a statement made in a press conference or a legal document filed in a distant courtroom has a direct life-or-death impact on people on the ground.
What's happening right now is this incredible diplomatic chain reaction. It's not just one country acting alone. It's a series of coordinated, deliberate moves by several Western nations. And all of it is creating this immense and frankly escalating pressure on Israel. You have to understand, this hasn't come out of nowhere. It's more like a cascade of policy shifts that's been building for a while. And today, it really hit a new level of intensity.
You can really see this pressure building momentum. Hot on the heels of France's recent move, the United Kingdom has now come out and formally announced its intention to recognize a Palestinian state. Now, this is a huge deal. We're talking about a major G7 nation, a permanent member of the UN Security Council. It's not an unconditional promise, though. They've set a deadline for September, and the whole thing is contingent on a ceasefire being agreed to and a real commitment to a two-state solution. And then, almost immediately, Malta chimed in, echoing the exact same sentiment, which shows you this is becoming a more coordinated European position, not just one country going rogue.
And this chain reaction isn't just staying in Europe. It's jumped the Atlantic. Citing what it calls the intolerable suffering in Gaza, Canada has just signaled a major shift in its decades-long policy in the Middle East. They've also pledged to recognize a Palestinian state at the UN. But Ottawa's conditions are really specific. They're calling for the Palestinian Authority to hold elections in 2026, and this is the key part, without Hamas being allowed to participate. They also want a clear, binding commitment to the future state's demilitarization. As you can imagine, Israel's response to this wave of diplomatic pressure has been incredibly swift and sharp. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu didn't mince words. He called these moves a reward for Hamas's monstrous terrorism. And that quote right there, it perfectly captures the deep diplomatic rift that's opening up. It just lays bare this massive gap in perception. On one side, you have nations who see this as a vital step towards peace. On the other, it's seen as a total validation of violence. A UK minister later came out and explicitly rejected that characterization, which just goes to show you how strained the relationship is becoming between Israel and some of its most steadfast traditional allies.
And the pressure isn't just diplomatic. It's now moving very firmly into the legal arena. Belgium has taken the pretty major step of referring a war crimes complaint, which was filed against two specific Israeli soldiers, and sending it directly to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. This move is significant because it lifts the issue out of the realm of state-to-state relations and places it directly into the hands of international law. Suddenly, the actions of individual soldiers are under the microscope of the world's highest court for these kinds of crimes.
And behind all of these headlines, behind all the high-level politics and legal arguments, there's a devastating human reality. This single number, 46, that represents the number of Palestinians that Gazan health officials say were killed in just a few recent incidents. And they weren't killed in combat. They were killed while desperately trying to get their hands on what little food aid is available. It is just a brutal, stark measure of the chaos and the extreme desperation that is fueling this entire humanitarian crisis.
And the severity of the situation, well, it's undeniable. The United Nations is past the point of just warning about a risk of famine. They're now on record stating that a full-scale famine is actively unfolding as we speak. The numbers are just grim. Officials have reported 48 deaths just from malnutrition in July alone, with the most vulnerable, children and the elderly, being hit the absolute hardest. And to make a terrible situation even worse, the very aid agencies that are on the ground trying to prevent a total catastrophe are themselves struggling to even operate safely amid all the ongoing conflict.
You know, with so much of the world's attention laser-focused on the Middle East, it's so important to remember that the war in Eastern Europe is still grinding on, day after day. It's a brutal conflict that continues to exact a heavy, heavy human toll, often far away from the front pages.
Let's look at the latest major incident. A Russian missile hit a Ukrainian military training facility. Now, Ukrainian officials have confirmed the deaths of at least 3 soldiers, which is a painful loss for a country already dealing with serious manpower shortages. But here, this is where you see the information war that runs right alongside the real one. Russia's Ministry of Defense claimed a wildly different result from the exact same attack. They claimed they killed or wounded around 200 troops. That number is completely unverified, of course, but it's a powerful reminder that in modern war, the truth itself is very often the first casualty. Okay, let's move to our second theme, economic crosswinds and regional strains. Because while those major global conflicts are grabbing the headlines, there are these powerful financial pressures and simmering regional fights that are creating their own fault lines all over the globe. And they impact everything, from the biggest national economies right down to tiny, disputed border villages.
So the biggest economic story of the day is definitely coming out of the United States. For the 5th consecutive meeting, the Federal Reserve has decided to hold its key interest rate steady, right in this range of 4.25 to 4.5%. And look, this isn't just some dry, domestic U.S. story. This decision has a direct ripple effect across the entire global economy. It influences borrowing costs for millions of people and businesses, affecting everything from mortgages to credit card rates, not just in America, but everywhere.
And this decision is creating some very clear political tension. On one side, you've got the White House with President Trump publicly and repeatedly calling for the Fed to cut interest rates to give the economy a boost. But on the other side, you have the Federal Reserve's committee, which voted 9-2 to hold the line. Their reasoning? They're pointing to persistent inflation and what they call only moderated growth. This is a very deliberate, very public assertion of the central bank's independence from political pressure, which is a principle that's really considered fundamental to the stability of the entire U.S. economy.
Now let's shift our focus halfway across the world to South Asia, because here we can see a perfect example of how economic policy is being wielded as a really sharp tool of geopolitics. The United States is right in the middle of deploying a classic carrot-and-stick strategy, and it's aimed squarely at the region's 2 biggest powers and rivals, India and Pakistan. So let's break this down. First, you have the stick, and it's aimed at India. A huge, sweeping 25% tariff on all of its imports coming into the U.S., plus an additional penalty on top of that. The official reasons given are India's own high tariffs and its ongoing trade relationship with Russia. Then, almost at the same time, here comes the carrot for Pakistan. The U.S. has unveiled a deal to give technical and financial help to develop Pakistan's unproven offshore oil reserves. Make no mistake, this is a crystal-clear geopolitical chess move. It's designed to reward one nation while putting some serious economic heat on its biggest regional competitor.
In this kind of strain, it's not just happening between the big guys. All over the world, we're seeing these smaller, but no less important, regional tensions just flaring up. They threaten stability, and they really show how fragile peace can be, even in places that are far from the global spotlight.
Just take 2 examples from today's news. Along the border between Uganda and South Sudan, which has been disputed for years, a firefight has broken out between soldiers from both countries. At least 4 people are dead. It's a perfect example of how these old territorial disputes can just explode into violence at a moment's notice. At the same time, over in Southeast Asia, there's this very fragile Malaysian-brokered truce between Thailand and Cambodia that's just barely holding on. It officially stopped 5 days of pretty intense fighting, but now Thailand's military is already reporting new small arms and even mortar fire from across the border. It just shows you how incredibly tenuous that peace really is.
For our third section, we're looking at a totally different kind of pressure. This is about the immense, overwhelming power of the natural world and our collective, often desperate struggle to respond. We are living on a planet that is clearly under stress. Let's start with the heat, because we are seeing tangible, record-shattering evidence of a warming climate.
In Japan, the city of Tamba just sweltered under 41.2 degrees Celsius. That's over 106 degrees Fahrenheit. It is the highest temperature ever reliably recorded in the entire history of the country. And it's not just the daytime heat. Over in Seoul, South Korea, people had to endure a record 22 tropical nights in July. That means the temperature never once dipped below 25 Celsius or 77 Fahrenheit all night long. There's no relief, and it puts this incredible strain on people's health and, of course, the power grid.
And this extreme heat in one part of the world is being mirrored by extreme rainfall in another. In China, catastrophic floods have absolutely swamped the region around the capital, Beijing. The death toll from these floods has now risen to at least 38, and tragically, many more people are still missing. I mean, the scale of this disaster is just staggering. To put it in perspective, the area got nearly a full year's worth of rain in just 4 days, an unbelievable deluge. It triggered massive floods, landslides, it destroyed roads, it collapsed bridges, and it forced over 80,000 people to flee their homes. Power was knocked out to 136 villages in the hardest-hit areas, which is just a brutal test of the infrastructure of one of the world's most modern megacities.
And as if all that wasn't enough for one day, the planet decided to unleash another one of its most powerful forces. A massive 8.8 magnitude earthquake struck in the sea right off the coast of Russia. It was so incredibly powerful that it immediately triggered a Pacific-wide tsunami alert, putting millions of people on high alert in dozens of countries. And then, to make things even more complicated, a nearby volcano erupted, likely triggered by the seismic shock, creating this complex, multi-hazard crisis situation.
So you see this sequence of events: record heat, devastating floods, a monster earthquake, and it all leads to this one critical question. When we are faced with catastrophe on this kind of scale, when nature really unleashes its full force, can the systems that we've built to protect ourselves, can they actually hold up under the strain?
And the answer, thankfully, in this specific case, was a resounding yes. The Pacific Tsunami Warning System, which is just this fantastic example of global cooperation, it worked almost perfectly. Timely alerts went out across the entire Pacific Rim. Those warnings gave authorities time to organize orderly mass evacuations in multiple countries, from Japan all the way to the U.S. West Coast and down into South America. Then, using real-time data from a network of buoys and sensors, the warnings were systematically, calmly downgraded as the threat passed. And the result? Millions of people who had evacuated were able to return home safe and sound. A major, major loss of life was averted. It's a true global success story.
Okay, on to our final section, where we look at how actual people and their governments are trying to adapt to all these pressures we've been talking about. We're going to cover some new policies tackling very modern problems, a really historic public health victory, and then end with a sobering reminder of just how fragile our daily lives can be.
Down in Australia, the government just passed 2 pretty landmark bills, each one addressing a very different kind of modern pressure. First, in a move that I guarantee you is being watched all over the world, they've passed a ban on YouTube accounts for anyone under 16. It's aimed at protecting youth mental health, and they're backing it up with some serious teeth, potential fines of up to 50 million Australian dollars for any platform that doesn't comply. Second, to deal with the ongoing cost of living crisis, they passed a bill that slashes all government-held student loan debt by 20%. That's a huge move, and it's projected to save graduates a collective $16 billion.
Now for just an incredible story of progress and pure human perseverance. Today, the World Health Organization has officially certified the nation of Suriname as being malaria-free. And as you can see from this timeline, this was absolutely not an overnight success. It's the culmination of a 70-year national effort. 70 years! It took decades of sustained investment in things like surveillance, prevention, and treatment. A really key part of their strategy was strong cooperation with their neighbors, because they understood that diseases don't respect borders. The big turning point came when they managed to go 3 consecutive years with 0 local transmission of the disease, and that all led to today's historic certification. It makes Suriname the first nation in the entire Amazon region to eradicate malaria. Just fantastic.
But even as we celebrate that kind of amazing progress, our last 2 stories for the day serve as a bit of a sobering counterpoint. They're a reminder of how fragile our complex, interconnected world really is, and how easily our systems, both the ones made of technology and the ones made of people, can be disrupted. Just look at these 2 very different examples of systems under strain. In the UK, a single technical issue,
a glitch somewhere in the National Air Traffic Control System brought air travel to a virtual standstill. It grounded flights at huge hubs like Heathrow and Gatwick and caused absolute chaos for thousands of travelers. It's a sharp reminder of just how dependent we are on this fragile, invisible technological infrastructure. And then a failure of a different kind of system, the social fabric itself. In Guatemala, armed members of the MS-13 gang opened fire on mourners at a funeral, killing 7 people in a brazen, horrifying attack linked to a violent turf war. It's a terrifying illustration of what happens when societal order completely breaks down.
So after a day that's been packed with diplomatic showdowns, economic tension, natural disasters, big policy shifts, and human tragedy, the question really becomes, how do we even begin to process a world with so many intense and interconnected pressures? Our goal here really is just to present the facts to you as clearly as we can, so that you can begin to form your own understanding of how all these different events link together.
Because when you see how a diplomatic decision made in London has a real impact in Gaza, or how an interest rate decision in Washington, D.C. can affect a business on the other side of the planet, you really start to see the bigger picture emerge. We really hope that connecting these dots for you has been valuable.
And so we're going to leave you with this one final question to think about. After seeing all the pressures of just a single day laid out like this, what is the one connection, the one thread between all these stories that stands out the most to you? Is it the link between climate change and our infrastructure? Is it the one between government policy and personal well-being? Or is it something else entirely? If you want to get this global briefing every single morning, be sure to follow us on Spotify and YouTube to listen to this explainer every morning at 8 a.m. GMT. Thanks so much for joining us for the explainer. We will be back tomorrow to connect the dots on a brand new day of headlines.